And so Beth is the character, even though she makes a lot of mistakes, she's the character with the emotional maturity from start to finish, I think.
Hmm.
And I what I like about her is I think she's a survivor.
Welcome to our latest episode of Book Reporter Talks To. Our guest today is Clare Leslie Hall. I was lucky enough to hear her talk about her book, Broken Country, back in September, and I've been looking forward to reading it. In fact, I took all these notes. Let me see if I can put it in a way that you could see them. Well, there are tons of notes on both of these pages about this book as she was speaking. And as her editor, Corrine, was also talking about the book and interviewing her. I was super looking forward to reading it. And then life got in the way, and I didn't get to it till 2 weeks ago. And I read a couple of chapters on a Thursday night. And then Friday night, I picked it back up and read until 2:45 in the morning. And when I finished at 2:45, I immediately took a picture. This is something I usually don't do, and posted it on Instagram and said, "You have to go read this book. This book is fabulous." And then I couldn't get to sleep because I was thinking about the book and I wanted to go back and start at the beginning and see what I'd done. So I often don't feel that way about book because I don't have time to go back, but I really wanted to go back. So this book is a Reese's Book Club selection as well as a B&N pick. And Claire just informed me it's also a Sunday Times bestseller, which is new news and very, very, very exciting. So I'm going to read what our reviewer, Rebecca Monroe, had to say about it. Readers of all genres know the exact moment when you read a book that somehow combines everything you love from each: the taut plotting of a mystery, the bated breath of a romance, the crystalline writing of literary fiction, into something far greater than the sum of its parts. Sure to top all of 2025's best of lists, Broken Country is a triumphant and truly exciting release for an author guaranteed to become your next favorite. And I feel that way as well. Trust me, this is the one you've been waiting for. I agree. It's a Book Reporter Bets On selection, and we're so happy to have Claire talk to us today from the UK. So, Claire, welcome.
Oh, hi, Carol. Thank you for that incredible introduction. I'm so happy to be here.
It's like I have to get through the rest of the review because I was like, oh, I won't do that paragraph. I'll do this one because one was just better than the next. I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Well,
I also want to say it's the biggest accolade to me is if you stay up reading because occasionally I do it and I don't lose my sleep for much. But
no,
when I if I get stuck into a book, sometimes it is 3 in the morning and it's painful the next day.
yeah, it was. It was extremely painful. My husband was like, "Oh, this is really good. You stayed up all night reading the book." And I said, "Yeah, flat on my back, flat on my back." So let's start by you giving an overview of Broken Country and tell people like why I was so excited that night. What was the passion behind it?
Yeah, so I mean, Broken Country, for people who don't know, is about a very passionate love triangle, and it's set in a small English village. It's in the Dorset landscape where I live, and it culminates with a big murder trial. So I describe it as a love story, a mystery, and a thriller all at the same time. And it's really the story of a young woman called Beth, who's completely torn between her farmer husband Frank and her first love Gabriel,
Mhm.
who she broke up with years before, but he arrives back in the village at a time when she's going through an awful lot, and he turns her life upside down.
That's exactly what happens. And the love's triangle is so well done. We see the passion that Beth has for both of the men. And she's going back and forth. I mean, at the beginning, it's young love, then it's committed love, then it's, oh, young love is back again. Did you start there, or was the starting point? What was the starting point for the book?
Yeah, so it was quite a specific moment, and funnily enough, it was like a moment of horror. We live in this farmhouse surrounded by farmland, and we I've got 3 children, and we bought. There's quite a big age gap. So when our youngest was about 9, and the teens were out partying and doing whatever the teens were doing, we bought him a puppy, and he became very inseparable with his puppy. And one day, my husband John was out running in the fields, and it was lambing season, and the dog Magnus strayed into a field of lambs, and the farmer threatened to shoot him. And that did not happen, thank goodness. But what did happen was this love triangle popped into my head. And I've never really had it before or since, but I had this very vivid picture of the farmer and his wife and a boy running towards them and his father, and I knew that there was chemistry between the boy's father and the farmer's wife. And that initial scene never really changed. And in a way, I think it's like the essence of the book, because you've got the grieving couple, you've got the sort of newborn lambs, and you've got the sexual tension and the jealousy between the three.
Right.
So that scene just has been there from start to finish.
Yes. And you've got this young boy who's completely innocent, who's just sad about his dog. That's all it is for him. It's like he doesn't see anything happening with adults. It's just me and my puppy. And why did you do that? And but yet you feel for the farmer because you know this is their livelihood. This is, and he could have plowed through all the lambs. He could have just, kept going.
Absolutely. And actually, when I started researching the book, I realized that even though we are surrounded by farmland, we don't own the farmland, we just own the farmhouse. I didn't know much about farming. And after
Mhm.
that near dog shooting incident, I started thinking about it, how devastated we would be if our dog was shot. But then I started to think about it from the farmer's perspective and how devastating it is for them, because in the UK, you can walk your dog off the leash on a footpath, and they lose lambs all the time. So I started to think about that, and then I spent some time with farmers researching the novel, and that really opened my eyes to sort of the harshness of pastoral life, but really the beauty. And
Mhm.
I think I was probably a little bit guilty before I had small children, of slightly rushing through life, living in this very beautiful landscape without really connecting with it, I
Mhm.
would say.
Mhm.
And so I learned how to milk cows in a manner of speaking. I wasn't
Mhm.
very good at it. And I went harvesting, and I stayed with a couple on a small holding in about 3 hours away in Kent. And that was incredible because they really were an inspiration for Frank and Beth, the farming couple in the book, because I could just see her joy and how she named every bird and every plant, and it was a real passion.
And also, Beth in the book is gone from she had wanted to go to Oxford, and we'll get back to that later, but she's a farmer's wife. She's washing their coveralls. She's putting everything together every day. If they go into town, she makes sure she's tending to everything on the farm. And it's an early morning, a late night, and it's just, it's only you out there. It's not like there's a whole collection of women that she's hanging around with and talking unless she goes into town and she goes to the pub. Other than that, it's a life that's very quiet but busy. And we
Yeah,
don't
that's
understand it
exactly
unless we
right.
do it. We don't understand it.
That's exactly right. And I think it's such a hard life,
Hmm.
actually, but there
Hmm.
are these moments of staggering beauty within it. And that was something I really got from the farmers. There would be, they're up at 5 or 4 and they're going to bed exhausted, and the weather is so harsh and there's not much money in it, and there's far less respect for farmers than there ever was. But what I noticed was how they'd point out these beautiful things. So, like, it could be a bird soaring to the sky, or a little tumbling sort of fox cub, whatever it was, that they would stop and notice. And that really, I really, really made me feel so aware of how it's innate, it's in their blood.
Hmm.
It's much more than even a vocation. And
Yeah.
I think with Frank and Beth, yes, it's hard, but it's their mutual passion.
Yeah. This is the land I've come to love. This is the land I've come to support. And I'm going to do whatever I have to do to make it work. If I have to go out in the middle of the night and deal with it, blah, blah, blah. It's that pivotal scene where the dog is killed in the book is it's such a big moment. And it's tough to watch, but it gives you feel for really what the sheep meant to the people. Just as you said, it's that moment of there's this passion here. There's this passion here that we don't quite understand. And then there's the simmering passion that is going on as well. There's passion on a lot of levels in this book, you know?
Yeah.
And then there's this trial that's referenced throughout the book. And I think that the book was so intriguing as we move back to the love stories. So we've got love happening, and then we've got this trial. Both are very unknown about what's going to happen, where everything is going to go. But the lives weave like this, and then your passion is up against these really stressful scenes. So I feel like you're taking the reader on this like journey of your tough, it's love, it's tough, it's love. It's so brilliant with the tension, and I feel a bit of it was like in their hands. Am I onto something that it was out of their hands of what was going on, the love that the people felt, and what was going on in the trial? And I feel like both are, what am I going to do about them? How do I feel?
Okay, yes, that's interesting. I definitely that's kind of I did the book came in layers, but I definitely that was my intention. The trial added so much suspense, but it was really a love story, although a man died always. It was a love story with a mystery, I would say. And I remember about 2 years in, I couldn't get out of my head that it would be really good to have a murder trial, but I had never written courtroom drama and haven't read a huge amount apart from, To Kill a Mockingbird and the sort of the very famous ones. And so I went and spent a week at the Old Bailey and in London, which is this really famous, it dates back to the 12th century courthouse. And you can sit in the public gallery and watch. And it was incredible because it's so theatrical. It was like at times I got so emotionally invested in
Hmm.
both, the prosecution and the defense. Which way was it going to go? And they're so persuasive and so convincing. And that inspired me to come home and write my own version. And I think it did really add another layer. It took the book in a whole new direction, really.
Completely in a different direction, and you open and you know that this is going to go on, and it's not like you sit there and say, oh, the trial happens like later on. You realize like we're going to be right into this at the beginning of the book. Did you spend a lot of time moving things around as you wrote? Because was that always the opener, or like, what was your, like,
Yeah.
the cold open for the book? It's because the very cold open, it's like the beginning of watching something and then you go someplace else.
Yeah, I think the opening of the book was always it wasn't the trial. It was always the next scene,
Hmm.
which is when Frank says Gabriel Wolf's come back to Meadowlands, and I always had 1955 and 1968, the two love stories in that first section. And my reason for doing that was because I really wanted the reader to feel the dichotomy that Beth's in. So I wanted them to be in 1955, caught up hopefully in the passionate first love affair.
Yes.
And then in the next chapter, I hope the reader is feeling, oh, wow, but she's in a good marriage and it's 1968 and things look pretty good here. So that's why I did that structure. But then once I think it was even before I went to the Old Bailey, I sat down and wrote that opening, and it was we were on holiday actually. And I think I'd woken up really early, and I just sat down and wrote it. And I thought, and I was having problems with the book. I did give up the book twice, but only for few weeks because when it wasn't working the way I wanted it to work, and I was writing another book. It was like a sort of side project, but I wasn't fully invested in it. And I remember I just got up really early and wrote that opening, The Farmer is Dead. And then I went, oh, I think I've got it. And it was so exciting. And I remember showing it to my husband and saying, I think this is what I need to do. And so it really came in layers, I would say.
And it's almost like you had to be away from your desk to come up with that idea because you were so rooted in what else you were doing. Go away, and all of a sudden it's like, wow. I always say I write better on airplanes than any place else. Get my best ideas on airplanes because nothing
Do
else is
you?
happening. Nothing else is
That's
happening,
interesting.
you know?
Yeah. And do you have sort of, headphones in so that you're canceling the noise around you or
Yeah.
yeah, that's so interesting. Well, I actually that well, we probably might talk about twists and spoiler-free way. But actually, one of the big surprise one, I've got an Instagram story because it shows when I thought of it. Honestly, it's about 2.5 years in, and I'm like, it has to be this way.
Yes.
So things just came in stages, and I often ask myself, when should you give up? Because I did give up briefly, and sometimes on the advice of people who said this book isn't quite landing, but I couldn't bear to give it up because I was so invested in that trio of characters. And I think exactly what you say. I really believe those 2 months or whatever it was when I wasn't writing it are the reason why it worked.
Hmm.
And one of the hardest things, do you agree, as a writer is to step away. It's
Hmm.
actually the hardest thing because you just think if I sit here, it'll work. And actually, a break gives you the perspective that you have to have.
Yeah, just you pull back and say, I really love this, but I don't love it yet. I don't love it as much as I could. Let's put it that
Yeah.
way. Yeah, there's a brilliant twist or two or three. There are a lot. There are a lot that I won't reveal. There's a big one, but there's a lot. So those ideas came later. And I think that a lot of people think that, an author sits down to write a book and they just keep going. Their fingers are on the keys, da da da. But a lot of times it's that moment where you say, well, what will up the tension? What if I
Mm.
move this here? What if I move this there? So that opener, totally, okay, you're picking this up because it's written as a love story, okay? And da da. You pick it up and you're like, wait a second, what have I got here? And how is that going to pair in? So you're pulling the reader in right from the beginning because of the opener. Because we're sitting there going, there's a trial, there's been a murder. We know that it's been a farmer, blah, blah, blah. And then you have to see where it's going to go. It's like, who
Yeah, and
could
some
say?
people are really anti-prologues, aren't they? But I love a prologue. I like it as a device, and I like it when as a reader. I love a prologue.
I often tell readers that you should go back and read the prologue at the end as well. Read it at the beginning and then go back at the end. And I reread it this morning and I said, it's interesting how it really crystallizes everything. But if you didn't have the rest of the perspective, it's one thing. It's here. It's sort of like it's flat and then it gets layers as you go on and read the book because you're just reading words. And then all of a sudden it's in the context of the rest. So I go, flip that prologue back at the end. It's almost like writer's row at the end. Okay, now go back to the prologue and read it.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know, I saw my daughter earlier today, and she'd read the book a couple of years ago, and I kept saying to her, "It's changed so much." Anyway, we met, and she had a copy of the book, and she was reading the prologue, and she said, "Oh, is it this or is it that?" And I said, "You know the answer," but she was confused as a reader, so that was really great.
Yeah,
Because that
yeah.
was
It's
my
like,
intention was that you could go either way, if that makes. I know that's a little bit vague, but
no, but
no.
that's exactly, we have to stay very vague because
Yeah.
it's the page turner, everybody. I proved it at 2:45 in the morning. The time frame is the 50s and the 60s. And did you always have it set in that time frame? Did you always know? Because it's such a wonderful time simply because there wasn't a lot of the noise that we have right now of
Mm.
noise. Like, I mean, sometimes I'd like to go back to 1963. I mean, seriously, of just calm it all down all day long of what's going on.
Oh, I so agree with you. And do you know, Carol, it was actually a contemporary story in the first year and a half, and it had three voices. The men had voices, Gabriel and Frank as well. And it was only once I decided, A, it's Beth's story, it's a woman torn between two men and two lifestyles, and B, it's a period novel, that it all fell into shape. And I think there were so many reasons for making it period. Really, I I so wanted to show the stark sort of gender and class equality between Beth and Gabriel because
Hmm.
he's born the boy from the big house. He's been to Eton. He's going to Oxford, and he's cushioned by wealth and entitlement, whereas she's a sort of working class girl who's just as clever and has the same aspirations as him. But her life gets knocked off course so easily, whereas his just goes to plan. And I felt that in the 50s it really was like that, particularly in rural Britain.
Hmm.
And also I think I don't know if you know The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley. It's quite a classic British novel,
Okay.
and it's about love across the class divide. I think it's set in the 30s, and it's like an inverse in a way. And I was wanting to refer to that novel because I love it. And that's the girl from the big house falls in love with the farmer, and also Atonement by Ian McEwan. I had those sort of period novels in my head,
Yeah.
and it just felt right. And I completely agree. I sort of feel now I want to write another novel in the same time period because it's just so nice not having internet, mobiles, all those things. It sort of frees you up to really focus on the story. And as you say, it's much simpler and
Yeah.
quieter.
It was, I mean, I remember when the phone rang on the wall, and you had to like take it to your room if you want to have a call. So you need a really long phone cord, and then somebody be pulling on the phone cord they want. And it's people don't understand that. If you didn't live through it, you don't understand
Yeah.
what it was
And I,
like. No
I agree. I
privacy.
was just listening to the audio book, and um, there's a bit where Beth tries to ring Gabriel, but he's engaged. And I was thinking that sounds so old-fashioned. And so she goes over to see him because she's impatient. And I'm like, it's hilarious, but it is what it was like.
Yeah. We went and just walked around and did things, and it was just a totally different time. And I'm glad I had that time in my life. I only admit to being 27, but trust me, I'm older. But it
Yeah.
was like we'd sit there and say, let's go play. And our parents didn't know we were playing under the highway. Like there was a way to get under the highway and play, and the cars would be above us, and that would be our adventure. And that would be something fun in the suburbs to do. Well, now, like, there's no way that anybody be playing under the parkway. There'd be gates and don't do this, or somebody would tell on you or whatever. It's just different world. Just a
Yeah, and
different world.
also, were you planning on having a secret love affair? It would be impossible.
Oh, yes.
Much easier in 1968, I would imagine.
Yes, yes, yes. Even when you're sneaking out of weddings and things like that, it's much, much easier. There's no ring cameras all over the place.
Yeah.
And, loss is such a huge, big part of this book. And I saw so much about how hard it is to write about loss. Was there a loss in your life that really made you understand the loss that these people go through?
Yeah, there definitely was. And it's funny, I have spoken about this before, but I've got three children, and as a mother, I didn't particularly. I always imagined I would never write a book about a mother losing a child because it's so painful to imagine. It's most, the worst, most painful kind of loss. But Beth arrived, and that was her story. And actually, I knew who she was from the very beginning. She was the one character, her interior. I sort of, for some reason, I just had it. But afterwards I was asked the question, did you lose a child? And I said, I'm so grateful, that's not my experience. But I realized that I lost my mother when I was 21 and
Mhm.
I was at university, and I didn't process the grief because she died one summer, and then I went back to university 500 miles away, and nobody said anything. And I was like, oh wow, but we were 20 and nobody really said anything. And I realized I just had to carry on. And so I did just carry on. And then I got to the point I couldn't talk about her, I couldn't think about her. It was like this massive block.
Mhm.
And so I think I completely and utterly, although I didn't realize it when I was writing it, I think I know how Jimmy was and how closed down he was. And Frank too. Frank just buried himself in work. He
Mhm.
didn't deal with his mother's grief. He certainly doesn't deal with losing a child. And Jimmy stopped caring about himself because he was only 9, and his dad was a 1950s man. He didn't
Mhm.
help. Nobody helped those boys
Mhm.
process their grief. And I think that really the bedrock of the problem with Frank and Beth's marriage is that he's unable to share in the grief and allow her to be open with her grief, and that's
Mhm.
really what goes wrong for those two.
And
So I think, yeah, a personal experience, not that I realized it when I wrote it, but in looking back I can see it.
yeah, my husband lost his dad at 21, so I never met his father. And I've heard stories about his father, but I've never met him. And the night he met me, he told me something. He told me his father passed away. He said, my father has died. And he said, it's the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life. And it is that moment that I often think about of, you told me that, like right from the beginning. And I often say, would your father have liked me? Would your father have, like, because his father was tough. And I said, what if he had trouble? He goes, no, he would have liked you. You were very like, you always, you were very work oriented, you were very mission oriented and things like that. But there's that moment that you wonder, like there's this thing where your husband doesn't know your mom. She doesn't know, like, who this
Yeah,
person was. And you're trying to describe the person to them. And it's just such an
yeah,
interesting moment of trying to explain who was this person that was so important to me.
completely. And it's actually uncanny, the conversation that we're having, because I had this exact conversation with my daughter at lunchtime, because I was explaining to her that when I met John, my husband, literally on our second date, we were sort of sharing, soul sharing, and he said to me, you seem like someone who's so defined by your loss." And it was like wow, because no one had ever, I never felt I could talk about it.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it was like he didn't mind, that probably sounds crazy, but it was a huge thing
Hmm.
that he saw it and was fine with it, and it's fine to be flawed. And yeah, it was, and that he recognized it
Yeah.
because I was, up until that point, I'd done a really good job of, zipping myself up and carrying on, not really showing anyone how I felt.
Yeah, and it's this moment that your friends are going through things like getting married and all these kinds of things, and you don't have that person. You don't have a
Yeah,
person. And it's very interesting because he also told me this was, I mean, I've been 3 years after his dad passed away, and he said to me, it took me that long to start grieving because it doesn't happen often right away. Because like you were going back to school, you're going this, and I think that what you have in this book is there's grieving goes on, and the way it goes on and the way it matures the two of them together. But at the same time, what is this grief doing? What is the grief doing? It's bringing us
yeah.
together, but there's this pivotal moment also of what else is going on in her life. That's so
Yeah,
good.
I agree. And I think, if anything, I think Frank's sort of arc in the story is actually learning how to grieve,
Mhm.
probably.
Yes.
And yeah, that's what Frank is the character that, when the book was hard, I always had to go back for Frank. It's he was, of course, it's Beth's story, but Frank was the one who really got under my skin, and I felt I want to know how his life ends. It's
Yeah.
funny,
How his
isn't
life
it?
ends and what's he's going to do.
Yeah,
There's,
he pulled me back.
there's this great line that this is a love story with too many beginnings. I refuse to think about how it's going to end. And it's Beth's line, and she's like, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, this man just walked back into my life. Like, what's going to happen? And her husband has said right up front, I know this isn't going to cause a problem between us. I was like, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know whether it's going to cause a problem. I don't know what's going to happen. And I think that that just, like, she talks also about walking into what she does with eyes wide open. So we feel her. So the conflict was always there. Like, was this part of the book always there, the conflict between what she was going to do?
Always. It was always there. There was always the sexual chemistry with Gabriel, and there was always the grief, that, and the fact, because something that I'm really fascinated with is nostalgia, and how much of what get Beth and Gabriel feel for each other is real and raw, and I think it is, but how much of it, in Beth's case, was wanting to go back to who she was before everything went wrong.
Hmm.
So I sort of always had that push pull in my head,
Hmm.
and I think. I just think nostalgia is quite an interesting subject to explore. I think I probably looked at it in my first novel, which wasn't published in the US, but it's just, I think you can think of it as a very sort of, sugar-scented emotion,
Hmm.
but in actual fact, you're yearning for days gone by, but actually there's a real sadness with nostalgia. And I guess what I was asking with Beth and Gabriel, as well as is it possible to love two people at once, is it ever really possible to go back?
Hmm.
Because all three characters have changed so much in the intervening years, and Beth and Frank have, well, guilt at the heart of their marriage. Frank certainly feels a lot of guilt, and yeah, and grief. And so they're very different people.
Hmm.
So I think I always had all of those feelings. But I think with Beth, she could be very unlikable because she makes some bad choices. So it was really important for me to reveal her story in a way that I hope, at least you will understand why she behaves as she does. It may not be excusable, but it is understandable.
Yeah,
This sort of passion for Gabriel.
so many women say to me, I can't read any books about infidelity. And I was like,
Yeah,
I can't go near it. I can't look at the subject. But here I feel like it is treated so it on such an interesting level because it's a multi-layer thing of what's going on. And I just think that I say, "Go pick this one up. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. You'll see what happens.
yeah.
You'll be fine."
I also, I get it. I've seen a couple of reviews who said that, I won't do infidelity. You know me, I won't do infidelity. And I'm like, I get it, but where's the story?
Yeah, exactly.
Being happily married forever is not a novel, is what I would say. You need
Happily
some
married, everything
conflict.
going on. No conflict
Yeah,
is not.
no one wants to read that book.
No, I have this line that I've said often, and probably people who are listening have heard me say it before. is everybody in their 20s and 30s has the best marriage, the best boyfriend, the best house, the best kids, everything's great. And about your 40s, you start to sit there and say, these kids do not clean anything up. And this house,
Yes.
I would have extended it back 10 more feet had I known what, and all of a sudden you get more real about what's going on and you
Yeah.
can actually have a conversation.
Mhm.
Whereas before, you have to be perfect. Everything's perfect. And you can't really have a
That's
conversation that
very
way.
true.
There's no
Yeah,
conflict.
that's very, very true.
But then
Yeah.
we've got Gabriel's mother, who is so full of herself. I mean, his mother is just beyond. She is perfect at everything that she does. And boy, does she know how to throw Beth every kind of curveball that she possibly can. Like, you are not wanted in this house. You are not whatever. And I love the moment when they're at dinner and she goes and picks up the dishes to help go clean in the kitchen where a girl that she knows is working. And her mother goes, "We don't stack in this house." And I just love, we don't stack the dishes is where she's going, like,
Oh, and Carol, that happened to me actually.
really.
So it was a moment of real snobbery when I stayed with someone's parents years ago, and I got up to stack the plates, and he said we don't stack in this house, and I felt so humiliated. So I've remembered it and popped it in the book. But
I
yeah, she's a terrible snob. She was great fun to write.
I think you should send those people a copy of the book with a little thing and underline that line and just send it. And make sure you have time up front, New York Sunday Times bestseller. I think that would be like
Yes.
just so fabulous to do. Just want you to
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that you
absolutely.
helped me with that line right there, just so you're like completely informed. It's just, I love it. I love
Yes,
it.
I love that. I'll do it.
Yeah. So there's a lot that's broken in this book. There's a lot that breaks. Was the title always Broken Country? No?
It wasn't. Oh gosh, I mean, there was lots of. First of all, it was called Savages, which now I can't even believe it was, but it sort of changed. And then it was called This Savage Land, I think. When I look at honestly, there were so many titles, but when I settled on Broken Country again, it was just like, oh, there it is. And it was really, it's quite a sort of esoteric title, but I wanted something that was poetic, and I wanted something that reflected the landscape, because I feel like the landscape's a character in the book in its
Very
own
much.
right. Well, that's what
Yes.
I wanted it to be. And I also felt it's about a marriage, a broken marriage, and a marriage is its own country in a way. So that was kind of, it was a little bit vague, but it just felt completely right to me. And I'm really happy that it stayed, because there were discussions, is this the right title? But actually my agent said, yes, it's the right title. She was always on my side with the title. She completely agreed,
Yeah.
because she said, for the kind of book that you're writing, you can have a sort of more poetic. You don't have to say exactly what's on the tin.
Hmm.
That's what she felt, and I love the title.
Yeah. I just feel like it totally says this is what's going on. There's so many people broken. There's so many things that are going on. I just love the way everything, the lives weave, like everything's going through. Was there ever a part where you just wrote the things that happened in the 50s and the things that happened in the 60s, or were you always going back and forth and changing characters?
I was always going back and forth. The only thing that changed, as I said, was that it wasn't always Beth narrating. It was
Right.
it was Beth and Frank and Gabriel. And actually, I don't regret it. I mean, there were 20 odd drafts of this novel, but I don't regret it, because I think it gave me an insight. I wrote Frank's chapters were in a sort of very almost, I don't know, quite masculine, quite sort of pared down, quite rural sort of style. And I guess it gave me an insight into who he was.
Right.
And so I don't regret that at all. But I did always do the timeline alternate chapters.
Right.
But I can only really work that way. I know some people can think I want to do this scene. But I kind of have to write it in order.
Yeah. But also it was before and after. So you're saying they're before and after of what? Before and after in their lives, before and after, and a lot more comes together as you go on. And in the trial, the book is intriguing because we go back to the love stories and then we go from passion to stressful scenes. So you're constantly have the reader going here and then pull yourself back. And now we're in love again. And now we're going back to the trial and we're moving along. there's an art to doing that and making it work, and it works. And that's something of a triumph, because often there's a slip in between, and it just is like, why you read a book where it's, why is it not all hanging together? This one, it all hung together. And I think it was the work of how many years? You know what I mean?
Oh, thank you. And actually, I'm just reminded of a really brilliant piece of advice I had when I wrote the trial, because, like I say, I had I don't have a legal background. I was worried about getting it wrong, and I spoke to a retired police detective who's become a crime author, a guy called Graham Bartlett, who was brilliant. And I never forgot, he said, don't get too hung up on how things happen in real life. Make drama your focus. It was such great advice, because
Right.
then I thought, what's the emotion of the characters during the trial? What is Beth feeling? What are her parents feeling? And it helped so much, rather than thinking this is how it ought to be, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yes, we have to do this to get to this part of the trial to get back. And it's not a Scott Turow
Exactly.
courtroom novel. That's not what this is. The trial is part of it, but you did it from the people's feeling point of view instead of just the case going back and forth, you know?
Yes, I'm sure a barrister would say, no, it would not happen in this order, but it doesn't matter. It's fiction.
They might not understand the passion, because it goes from passion to stressful scenes. And I think that's what gives the book the brilliant tension, because you're going back and forth from one. And I don't know, just what I'm just seeing, and Beth's always walking into things with her eyes wide open, though. Like she knows what she's getting involved in. And she's also feeling from a very young age she can get herself out of what she's gotten herself into. And at the beginning, I mean, her mom condones her hanging out with Gabriel. Her mother is fine with this happening, which I found was so great, especially since it was the 50s. And her mom was
Yeah.
like, this sounds like you're having fun. You're having a good time. I don't know if too many parents would have said that, but that was the way she was brought up. And I think that was a lot of what was instilled of her, of enjoy life. Mhm.
I'm so glad you picked up on that. I think that it was unusual, her upbringing, and I think that she is the one character in the book who has some, great parents who are open-minded and more sort of modern, and it's very loving. And actually, obviously, we know that Frank loses his mum at a really formative age, and Gabriel's mother is emotionally detached. And so Beth is the character, even though she makes a lot of mistakes, she's the character with the emotional maturity from start to finish, I think.
Mhm.
And what I like about her is I think she's a survivor, and her life gets knocked off course quite a few times, but she finds a new path. And that's what I really love most about Beth, is that she fights her way through. She's a fighter, I would say.
It's also, she was at beginning pining to go to Oxford. And then when her life changed in, it's not like she looks back and says, gee, if I'd been there, I would have been writing this book or whatever. She's on with her farm life now. She's in like a different world. It's, yeah, every once in a while she'll reflect back on that time, but it's not like my life is a loss because of I didn't do that. That's the way I was
I
feeling
think
looking at her.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that what I hoped to show in the novel was that even though she has these aspirations and she's desperate to go to Oxford and she wants to be a published writer, she marries Frank and she realizes it's a good life, maybe a more rewarding life, and that the landscape is its own form of education and connection. And I love that about Beth. But I do think that when Gabriel comes back into her life and she starts looking after Leo, uh, she starts to see the life of a successful author. I think there is a craving in Beth,
Yeah.
and it's he represents the intellectual life she thought she was going to have.
What she
And
thought she was
that's
going to
why I
have
think
and what she thought she
choice.
was going to come to be, you know? Journalism was where you started out. And what did you take from your journalism career into your writing career?
Yeah, I think it's goods and bads. I think that when I first started trying to write creatively, I mean, I always wrote as a child, always from sort of 6 or what 7,
Mhm.
and then I stopped at university, and then I became a journalist because I just assumed that would be a writing career, and I couldn't have written a novel in my 20s anyway. But when I started in my 30s, I started writing creatively. I remember feeling quite stymied by the sort of reporter style, because it's so formulaic.
Mhm.
And I found it, I had to work hard to be more lyrical in my prose. And I think I still have quite a pared down style. And that probably, I don't tend to overwrite. In fact, sometimes I think I could put more description in because, and I'm sure that stems back from the days as being a journalist. But the good thing about it is I can just sit down and write. Not to say it always comes easily, often it doesn't, but I'm very good at getting to my desk and writing.
You're used
And
to deadlines.
I'm pretty good at deadlines, am I? Pretty good. Usually.
I mean, the paper is going to go out. You have to get it done. But
Yes.
yeah, you have to get it done. And that's the one thing that I worked for a newspaper was on the other side, was on the business side. But it has to go, and I worked for a magazine for a while. It has to go to the printer at some point. Like it has to move on. And I was there in the 70s and early 80s. It was not the same as what it is now in the 90s.
No.
You had to put every night we put pages. There would be a pouch that would go to Chicago to get printed, a pouch that would leave to go. And someone would get on a
Amazing.
plane with the pouch and go. And you think about that compared to now. And I'm like, but you had to have it ready by 4 o'clock to make sure you made the pouch, you know?
Was it like in The Devil Wears Prada when they take the book?
Yes, yes,
Like that?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. But this was like what had to get printed. This is like what had to
Yes.
go. These are all the art pages that are. And I look back on those times, and I mean, I remember when we got a fax machine. It was so exciting because then we could do on that crappy little paper that everything faded off of, whatever. But there were those moments where it was coming into this new period, but we were still stuck into the pages have to go to Chicago with somebody and
And
carrying the pouch.
the spike, I remember when I started, they had the spike when they get your story, it would go on the spike. Amazing, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. And then we had there was a pneumatic, or if I'm saying the wrong word, tube that you would send it up to the composing room. So you put what you have in the tube and like it would go up the stairs. And I'm like, this is really like archaic stuff now looking back, but it worked. It worked at the time. The paper got out every day. It's like now
Yeah.
it's just all different, but we did produce something every day. We did, it's not like nothing happened.
And the thing is, you couldn't be precious.
No.
You that that was really good. I'm probably much more precious now. I sometimes go and work in a cafe or this little sort of gym that I'm belong to, and I'm like, oh my God, there's so are people talking on their phone. Whereas back in the day, I could just work in a busy newsroom,
Oh,
no problem.
yeah, no
Yeah.
problem. I'm just going to like cycle down, and there were no headphones, nothing like that.
Yes.
So you've written two novels, Him and Mine, which were only published in the UK. I hear that one of them may be published in the United States, may come over here. True?
Yes, it was him and mine. They're published in the UK and I think several other European, Germany and other European countries, but not the US. But very excitingly, they're being republished in the UK and in the US as with new titles and new covers. So they're now going to be called Pictures of Him and Days You Were Mine. And they're the same novels, but what's really lovely is and also was very fascinating because I haven't read those books for 6 years was I went in and did a sort of light edit on them, just bringing them maybe a little bit more up to date, and I got to write a new ending for Days You Were Mine. I never liked the ending, and that was because that was a two-book deal. I had to do it really fast, and I always felt I didn't get that ending quite right, and now I think the ending's good. It's
There's
very
that
exciting.
there's thing about the deadlines are great to stop things, but sometimes you're not quite there yet. And when you
Yes.
say you were writing on deadline, it's the authors that do a book a year or do a book every, other. It's like, how do you is each one something that when you line them up, and there are eight of them, this one worked, this one I would change this one I wish I had more time, this one I wish I had moved later, things like that.
I completely agree with you. And I think if you look at Broken Country, it was 4 years. And those 4 years were what it took for me to get the book into shape. But the other side of that is I felt a lot of despair at times. And
Mhm.
I'd have author friends who were putting another book out. And I felt a bit hopeless sometimes because I'm like, will I ever get this book over the finish line? And I was out of contract. So it was fine. But also I felt I might never get there. And it's kind of, you need the time, but you also have to keep the faith, and it's very hard sometimes.
Yeah, well, everybody just thinks it's like, go on, you finish the book, you go on tour, and everybody's hunky dory. And when we work with a lot of authors on their websites, and I know it's a lot of stuff that happens in the middle. There are a lot of dates
Yes.
that move, there's a lot of plots that move, there's a lot of rewriting going on.
Yes.
And when did you, okay, you had an agent that you were working with. When did she see things? Did you wait till you were like over the 4 years? Did she see at the beginning? Where was she looking at things?
I actually changed agents in the middle of the process.
Mhm.
So, um, and that was kind of a decision just because I'd sort of stopped writing the book, and then I felt I wanted to go back to the book, and so I changed agents. So the new agent just saw 10,000 words, and by that stage, it was a period novel. It was Beth's story. So it had changed in my head. I knew how I was doing it. I knew I was going to do a trial. I knew all these things.
Hmm.
And she I just went she just completely connected with it, which was
Hmm.
amazing.
Yeah.
And she really got the fact it should be period. She really got the fact that, because I think what I felt before previously was a little stymied by being positioned in the UK as a thriller writer,
Hmm.
because although of course there was suspense in both those books, I didn't really ever feel I was writing psychological thrillers. I think my books are maybe quite hard to categorize,
Hmm.
but I think I'm drawn to those stories. I've always been drawn to stories that cross love and emotion and suspense and maybe murder as well.
Hmm.
And so the agent that I worked with, Hattie, this on this book, I did the first draft of the new version, draft number 9 or something, and then I think we did 3 pretty big edits, and
Hmm.
she was brilliant. And
Hmm.
actually, it was partly me having had a break, and then maybe it was also having an agent, so it's a fresh pair of eyes.
Hmm.
So she's coming in completely fresh. All those things went into it finally working, I would say.
Yeah, it's finally the fresh set of eyes and you moving into a different place as well. So were these characters hard to leave on the page? Was it hard to wrap, or did you just feel, okay, I've got them in a good place?
Oh, so hard. Yeah, so hard. Because it was 4 years. But what's lovely is this. It's so lovely that they come back to you. And then you're talking about it with readers. It's amazing. There's been a sort of 9 month lull, which has been really quite hard. But what I did with this book, which I've never done before, was I had a playlist of instrumental tracks, which really, because when I'm trying to come up with a character, I think I like to think of their emotion. And in Beth's case, it was yearning for the past, yearning for Gabriel, yearning for her life with Bobby. And I just happened to hear this track. It was called Happiness Does Not Wait by Oliver Arnolds, who's a modern composer. And I just kept playing it. And I was like, oh, that's Beth and Gabriel. It's Beth and Gabriel. And then I put together maybe 8 tracks, similar vein, and it wasn't so much that I would work out the plot, but it was that I could stay with the emotion of the book. And I honestly did that on every single school run, every single dog walk, every single supermarket trip. I listened to them over and over and over and over again. And now occasionally I put the music back on. And actually I did do a Broken Country playlist, and it's got things like songs from the book. So it's got Elvis Can't Help Falling in Love,
Oh yeah.
which is a scene at the wedding when the two couples, Frank and Beth and Jimmy and Nina, are dancing and Gabriel's watching. So I like to play that, and I sort of can sort of visualize them, because
Yes.
the whole book is quite like a film in my head because it's my landscape, I suppose.
Hmm. It's like it's running like film in your head of what's going on. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can
I
understand
just every scene I see, because it's kind of where I live.
it.
It's strange.
Yeah. It's like the neighbors are like, am I in it? Am I the
Yes.
farmer? Am I the farmer? I'm like, what's going on with the
Yeah.
farmer? Did I want to be the farmer? Let me see. Yeah, it's Laura Dave listens to the same song over and over when she writes a book on repeat. I can't remember what the song was this past time, but she said it just keeps her in the zone of working, of like what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. That's exactly what I do. But actually, not while I'm working, but while I'm in between time. So I felt like I stayed with Beth's emotional landscape for an extra 2 hours a day when I was listening to the music.
Yeah. And the kids are in the car going, are you ever going to change what we're listening to in the car?
Oh, 100%. My son used to say, "Oh, not this," because it's quite depressing, lots of weepy strings, very
Yeah, not
melancholy
again,
music.
Mom, please, not again, you know? Oh
Yeah,
my gosh. Oh
totally.
my gosh. I know that people are asking, are you Team Frank or Team Gabriel? Have you seen voting on this and how's the voting going? Like who's with Frank? It's is
Oh,
it
wow. I think everyone's with Frank. Actually, do you know, it's so interesting. I thought everybody was Frank because my UK publisher did this really fun video when they went around the office asking Team Frank,
yes,
Team
yes, yes,
Gabriel,
yes.
and almost everyone was Team Frank. I mean, Frank's a great guy. Gabriel's pretty hot though, I would say. Anyway, what was really interesting when I was in New York last week was that that conversation came up, and quite a lot of the really younger girls were saying they were Gabriel, and we decided that maybe it's an age thing,
Maybe.
Maybe when you're a little bit older, you think Frank, steady guy. When you're young, you're like, I'll take the bad boy. But I think I'm going to be Team Frank because he was the character that, he's hysterical, he's quite quiet and hard to get to know, but he was the one that really pulled me into the story when it was going wrong, I suppose.
I think that in this one, I'd be Team Frank. I remember the end of Paper Palace where nobody could understand like what
I love
happened.
that book.
And I remember one time I had her on for one of our Bookachino Live book groups, and everybody was voting. And she's like, really? This is the way. And in my group, the same thing happened. It's like nobody saw it the same way. And I found it
This is so
fascinating.
interesting. So this
Fascinating. And
I
because,
I've actually Googled it. I loved that book.
yeah,
I Googled it. Like, which one is it?
right.
Because I thought it was I thought it was Jonas, and
Right.
then I realized it Peter. Anyway, it's amazing. I love that. I love the duality of that ending. It's so
Yeah.
clever.
But we were sitting there voting, and she's like, it's very clear on the page. And like, everybody's going, what was clear? What was clear? So when we had my book group over, I read the last two pages. They go, oh, okay, got it. So it's very funny.
Yeah, I think I got it. I got it on the second reading,
Yeah,
but you could misinterpret it quite easily, couldn't
totally.
you?
Totally. It could go the other
You
way.
think she's going in the lake.
When she's going, like, and there was something about taking off the ring. They said, no, she
She
always
took
takes
off
off the
her
ring.
ring.
She always takes
Yeah.
the ring off to go in. Don't you remember from pages before? Because that was in there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, that is very helpful to know because I was baffled by that, but in a good way. I love it. That's a
Well,
great book.
and this book's got that same kind of vibe, that same kind of like feeling. There's a Broken Country now. Do you have the playlist on Spotify yet? Is the playlist
I
up there?
do actually.
Okay. I
Yes,
was
and I
hunting
have
for
put it's not the sad, weepy, depressing one. It's way better. It it's a bit more varied. It's got lots of tracks from the book, and it's got lots of sort of passionate love songs, and it's got 50 songs. Yes, and it's on just Broken Country, Clare Leslie Hall. It's on Spotify.
Okay, so I'm gonna go look for that because I would take the weepy ones though too. That would have been fun. That would have been fun. So the cover's terrific. I know the UK cover is different, but this cover, I was hanging up to the angle. I always have bad lighting on this.
Yeah,
Cover's
I can show
terrific. We've
you
got the
the.
farmhouse, we've got the farm, we've got this beautiful tree, and we've got the birds flying. Was this always the cover for the US, or did they play around with the cover?
They did play around with it, but it was the one that everybody liked, and I
Yeah.
and I absolutely love it. But did you see the Barnes and Noble special edition?
No, I haven't seen it yet. No, is it different?
Oh, it's downstairs where I would show you,
Okay.
but it's beautiful. It's so different. It's an oak tree, and it's got sort of a sunset and little sheep grazing. It's really, really so pretty.
Well, do you know, I don't know if the type stayed like this, but I love the way it looks like it's handwritten and your name is handwritten. And I don't know if
Yeah,
I
actually, it's more like big painted letters. Hang on, let me
yes,
hold it up.
yes, yeah, yeah. Maybe you'll probably do it
Can you
better than
see?
me. Yes, yes,
Can
yes,
you
yes.
see
Yeah.
properly? Yeah.
And it
But I
did
do,
finish.
I adore this cover. I think it's so beautiful.
Well,
Just, I
just
love
so
the yellow. The yellows are
yeah,
gorgeous, isn't it?
I still have my folded down page galley. Okay, I haven't gotten the final copy yet. I have the folded down page galley. It's a bit debate whether I wear a yellow shirt or go in with the countryside with my shirt today. I always like to do something to bring out the book
Yeah.
cover. Um, So Hattie Morahan narrates the audio. Was there a particular reason you selected her? I know you said you loved it, and I was listening to it earlier. It's terrific. Was there?
Well, it was really down to my UK publisher John Murray, and they said we just want to send you this actress. We've been holding out, hoping above hope that we'll get we she would do it, and she said yes, but tell us what you think. And of course, I listened to her and I was like, she's amazing.
Right.
Now it turns out she's done lots of classics like Sense and Sensibility, so I'm going to go and listen to her everything she's done. I know she did Girl with a Pearl Earring, but
Mm,
I just think she's absolutely wonderful and she brings it to life. It's
yes.
incredible. It's
Yes.
sort of, yeah, it's amazing. I think she's done the most spectacular job.
I was listening to tracks as I was writing questions before, and I was like, oh, I'm listening to tracks, and it's really good, really, really well done. So Sony 3000 Pictures preemptively acquired the film rights. I actually went and looked up the release yesterday, and I realized it was from March 24, a year ago, okay, with Hello Sunshine producing, and this happened last March. Did they read close to the final book at that time? Because I know Chris Whitaker said that when his book was picked up by Jenna Bush, Jenna Bush Hager, he says she has a very different book. It was like this big and now it's this big because there were many more pages. I had
Interesting.
not finished editing it. And so were you done when they saw it?
So when they saw it, it had gone on submission, and I would say the book didn't change structurally really because my agent Hattie and I had done these three pretty big edits before it went on submission. But of course, it did change once my US editor Karina and my UK editors had got involved. It's probably a slicker, faster read, but structurally the story is exactly the same.
Mhm.
So they read a fairly finished version, I would say.
Isn't it amazing though? A year ago, like a year ago, that was like already like nailed. It's like already done. Amazing. And by last
So
year, it had already sold into 25 territories. So were there moments that you're sitting in your house going, okay, wait a second now. Let me just go over this. I've got a movie deal and it's sold into 25 countries and I'm making dinner and I'm going to do the
oh, I mean,
laundry.
Carol, every day. I mean, you know what it's like when you work and you write in a vacuum. That's the thing.
Mhm,
And look, it's been a long old road for me
mhm.
because I'm in my 50s and I was trying to write novels from my in my 30s and I got published just before I was 50, but it's a long road with a lot of rejection and some giving up and some starting again and all of those things. And of course, you always have the dream. You always want it to, well, look, you always want it to be a Sunday Times bestseller.
Yes,
And it
exactly. There you
and,
go.
and so yeah, it's hard to take in, but so thrilling. And also I've just everybody I'm working with, all the publishers, they're just so lovely.
Yeah.
It's felt like a very joyous year, actually, I have to
Yeah, I had
say.
hoped to meet you when you were in New York last week, but it just the tides didn't work for. They said she's at the Upper West Side tonight, and I was like, it's pouring rain, and I live in New Jersey. This is going to be a trek
Yeah.
that I don't think I can handle, you know. But it's just really, really good. So the last couple of months have been really busy. Are the next couple of months just as busy with travel and promotion for all the different countries, or are you able to get back and work on something?
Um, a bit of both. I think it is quite busy, and I have had my head in promotion, and I know
Yeah.
I'm doing quite a bit of travel coming up. And I know my foreign rights agent said, I think you can expect to be doing quite a bit more.
Hmm.
But I haven't got a full idea, but I've got a sort of a half idea, and I do really want to get back into something. So I think I'm hoping in the next few weeks that I'll be able to sit down and start just because, yeah, it's what I like to do.
And
But
that'll be all that.
I've had a long old gap without writing. It's been about a year.
But just think of all those plane rides. If you go to all those countries of all that time to
Exactly.
just sit and think,
Yeah.
just think and, know that you've already achieved a big dream, like already achieved it. So that, the next thing you do, it's not like, can I ever do this? You did it. You did it. You hit the
Oh,
Sunday
thank
Times
you.
list. You did it.
I know it's hard to take in, but incredible. I'm so thrilled.
Well, I'm hoping that you'll come back to we do
Me
this
too.
this event called Book Reporter Talk a Bookachino Live book group, okay? And what we do is we wait till a book is out for a while because we want to make sure a lot of people have time to read it. And then we do an evening where I ask some questions and then readers come on and ask questions. And then we go to Q&A from the audience and we get hundreds of people showing up at these events because it's a chance for you to see the readers that you may not see in Idaho. Like you're not going to make it to all 50 states. Let's get real. But this is a
Yes.
way for you to do this and for them to take it to their book club and say, here's the author interview. If she was with us tonight, this is what she'd be talking about and this is what she'd be saying. So we hope to have you back with that. I will be talking to your publicity
Oh, I
people
love to do that.
because the
That sounds so
conversations are
fun.
they're fascinating. They're fascinating.
That sounds so fun. Something that I did when was it? It was in January. I went to Amsterdam and with the publisher, and they organized a book group. It was probably 20 people, but they'd all read the book. And my goodness, it was just so fascinating hearing the different takes.
Mhm.
I love talking to readers. It's the best thing.
It's the best. And if you don't have time to do like lots of groups, it's another way to do it. It's another way to do it is just like, okay, you're going to come on Book Reporter, Bookachino Live book group, and people know about this and they show up because it's like, oh yeah, this is a really good thing. I think we've been doing them since 2023. We just came up with
Oh,
the
that
idea
sounds
one day and said, let's do this. And we've done Kristen Hanna, Lisa C. We've done tons, William Ken Kruger, tons and tons of authors. And last week, Lisa Wingate was on for an hour and a half. And she says, these readers were so much fun. So I hope to have you back to
Oh,
do
that
that.
sounds amazing. I would love to do that.
And I wish you so, so much success. I hope we get to meet at some point along the way, but so much success and enjoy. Take the moment to really enjoy it
Oh,
because
thank you.
a long road.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a real joy talking to you.
To our
And I
readers,
hope we get to meet soon.
I know we'll figure that out. We'll definitely work it out. And to our readers, we look
Yeah.
forward to seeing you next time on Book Reporter Talks to. Thanks for joining us.